You think monsters hide in shadows? Think again. On Willow Lane, behind the freshly painted doors and smiling faces, a storm was brewing, one fueled by control, manipulation, and pure evil. This is the story of Marcus Thorne, and how the American dream turned into a living hell. Are you ready to see what really hides behind the perfect facade? It's strange how darkness can hide in the most ordinary places, isn't it? Behind neatly trimmed hedges, freshly painted front doors, the illusion of normalcy. Control, too, can wear a pleasant mask. Some folks just seem naturally in charge, their world neatly ordered, everyone orbiting around them just so. Until the orbit decays. Until the control snaps. Down on Willow Lane, and the unassuming town of Oakhaven, lived such a man. You wouldn't necessarily pick him out of a crowd, not at first glance anyway. But watch him for a while, see the way people deferred, the way his presence seemed to fill whatever space he occupied, yeah, you'd feel it. He was the master of his small, cluttered domain. A domain brimming with secrets, far more than any one house should hold. There was a weight to the air around that place, a sense of something held perpetually in check, ready to burst. And eventually, it did. Spectacularly. Tragically. Leaving behind little more than smoke, questions, and the ghosts of what might have been. Lives shattered. Futures extinguished. A genuine tragedy, born from manipulation and a suffocating need for dominance. Oakhaven usually minded its own business, a town like countless others where routines ruled the day. Yet, the house on Willow Lane, it drew eyes. The constant activity, the sheer number of faces, children mostly, but women too, their relationships complex and whispered about. It wasn't just a family, it felt like a tangled, sprawling web, with him sitting squarely at the center, pulling every string. How does a person get like that? What twists inside someone to see others, even children, as pawns in a game of power and personal gain? Was it pure greed? A desperate hunger for validation? Or something darker, something pathologically wired for control at any cost? These are the questions that echo long after the sirens fade. The man's name was Marcus Thorne. And to truly understand the devastation he wrought, to make any sense of the ashes on Willow Lane, we need to rewind. We need to look at the very first signs of the firestorm he would become, long before the final inferno consumed everything. That darkness surrounding Marcus Thorne? It wasn't something that sprang up overnight. Oh no. Its roots stretched back, twisting deep into his younger years, and twined with the life of the first woman who got close enough to glimpse the chilling truth beneath the surface, a bright-eyed girl named Eliza. When they first met, Marcus was pure magnetism. He had this way about him, an intense focus that could make you feel like the most important person on earth. Eliza, barely out of school and drawn to his confident swagger, fell hard and fast. He was exciting, different from anyone she knew, promising a life less ordinary. For a while, it almost felt real. But the shine wore off quickly, revealing something ugly underneath. The adoration soured into possession. Compliments became critiques, about her friends, the way she dressed, the time she spent away from him. Little fissures of coercive control spiderwebbed across their relationship. Then came the flashes of temper, sudden and terrifying. An argument in a pub that ended with him violently shoving her, his face contorted in rage. A favorite vase smashed against the wall because she'd paid too much attention to a visiting relative's baby. He'd apologize later, of course. Turn on the charm again. Blame his temper, his passion. Anything but himself. Eliza learned to navigate these storms, making herself smaller, quieter, constantly trying to appease the unpredictable force he'd become. The early warning signs were there, loud and clear, but buried under layers of manipulation and hope. Her fear became a constant, heavy presence, a knot in her stomach that never fully loosened. Domestic violence rarely starts with the worst, it creeps in, normalizes itself, until you're drowning. She finally decided she couldn't live like that anymore. Couldn't endure the constant tension, the casual cruelty, the ever-present threat. She tried to end it cleanly, hoping distance might quell his possessiveness. It only ignited it. His reaction was explosive, a terrifying display of wounded pride and absolute refusal to be denied. He hunted her down, broke into her sanctuary, his eyes burning with a terrifying declaration, "Mine." The ensuing attack was brutal, frenzied, driven by a rage that aimed not just to hurt, but to erase her defiance. It was a miracle she survived, pulled back from the brink by sheer luck and medical intervention. Trauma like that leaves scars far deeper than the physical. And Marcus Thorne? In the sterile light of the courtroom, he transformed again. The manipulator took center stage, weaving a narrative of self-defense, of passion overflowing. He was convincing. Perhaps even shed a tear. The system, maybe overwhelmed, maybe just blind, handed down a sentence that felt more like a reprimand than a reckoning for attempted murder. A few short years. He was out even sooner, supposedly for good behavior. Failed justice doesn't even begin to cover it. He'd faced a consequence, yes, but one so disproportionate to the act that it likely only reinforced his belief that he could get away with anything. This freedom wasn't a chance for redemption, it was merely a release back into the wild, the darkness within him unchecked, undeterred, and ready to cast its shadow over someone new. This wasn't an end to his darkness, it was merely an intermission. The monster hadn't been slain, just temporarily inconvenienced. And free again, Marcus Thorne carried those unlearned lessons forward, ready to find new lives to shape, control, and potentially shatter. He wasn't attacked to stay alone for long, needing someone, anyone, to reflect his perceived importance. Soon, there was Penelope. Perhaps she saw a chance for a settled life, or maybe she just didn't know the full story of Eliza. They married, had children. From the outside looking in, maybe it seemed like Marcus had finally settled down. But the need for absolute control hadn't vanished, it had just become quieter. More insidious. The shouting might have lessened, replaced by chilling silences, financial reins held tight, a constant, unspoken demand that Penelope's existence serve his. Penelope must have known, mustn't she? Known what he was capable of? The whispers about Eliza, the way people in Oakhaven sometimes looked at Marcus, she couldn't have been completely naive. More likely, she was trapped by fear. Paralyzed by the knowledge of his past violence, praying that if she just kept her head down, stayed compliant, his volatile attention might eventually drift elsewhere. It's a grim sort of hope, choosing the devil you know. Complicity born of terror? Maybe. Who can truly judge from the outside? It's easy to say, why didn't she leave? Harder to understand the suffocating reality of coercive control. And Marcus's gaze did eventually drift. Predictably, tragically, towards youth and vulnerability. Hazel was barely 14, seeking escape from her own troubled home life, when Marcus turned his practiced charm upon her. He was older, seemed worldly, made her feel chosen, special. Textbook grooming, really. He isolated her, manipulated her emotions, played the savior. By the time she turned 16, she was ready to run away entirely, right into his waiting arms, blind to the cycle of abuse she was stepping into. Penelope, discovering the affair, finally left him, perhaps her fear overcome by disgust, or maybe just seeing an escape hatch open. For Hazel, the initial infatuation quickly curdled into the familiar nightmare. Marcus's cruelty resurfaced, sharper perhaps for having been briefly contained. There were punishments for failing to produce the daughter he inexplicably craved, degrading experiences like being locked outside in the damp garden for minor infractions. He even seemed to encourage his older sons to disrespect her, part of his calculated dehumanization. But Hazel had a resilience Penelope hadn't. Pushed to the edge by his escalating threats and suffocating possessiveness, she finally broke free. One desperate night, fueled by adrenaline and terror, she scaled the back fence and ran, a frantic escape leaving her children temporarily behind, a choice no mother makes lightly, but one born of absolute necessity. For Marcus, this wasn't about lost love, it was about defiance. About losing control over his possession, his source of potential income. The pattern was undeniable now. His need for control, his predatory targeting of the vulnerable, was escalating. And having just one woman wasn't enough anymore. His ambition required something more elaborate, something even more disturbing. Having one woman under his thumb wasn't enough anymore. His appetite for control, for the benefits children brought, demanded a more complex, and ultimately more dangerous, arrangement. So entered Serafina. She arrived on Willow Lane like driftwood, seeking refuge from her own past storm, a young son clinging to her hand. Marcus, ever the opportunist sensing vulnerability, played the protector, the strong shoulder, the guardian angel she desperately needed. He quickly absorbed her son into his chaotic brood, proposed marriage even, cementing her reliance, her entrapment. He offered sanctuary, but the price was steep. And just as Serafina was tentatively finding her footing in this strange new world, Marcus's attention snagged on another potential recruit. Chloe was even younger, barely 16, adrift and alone after bouncing through the care system. An orphan, easy prey. What did she see in Marcus? A father figure? A provider? Whatever hook he used, it worked. Soon, Chloe wasn't just visiting Willow Lane, she was living there too, installed not merely as a friend of the family, but as Marcus's mistress, right under the same cramped roof as his now wife, Serafina. Just picture it, the small, perpetually cluttered house groaning under the weight of this unconventional family. 3 adults, 11 children eventually, crammed into 3 bedrooms. Noise, chaos, a constant lack of privacy, the air thick with unspoken tensions. A pressure cooker environment, meticulously engineered and overseen by Marcus Thorne. What must life have been like for Serafina and Chloe? Forced into proximity, sharing the same man, the same space, the same suffocating reality. Were they allies? Did they find moments of solidarity, whispering frustrations when Marcus was out, united by their shared circumstance? Or were they rivals, constantly vying for scraps of his attention, his approval, his limited resources? Maybe it shifted day by day. One afternoon, perhaps a shared, weary smile over a pile of laundry, the next morning, a sharp word, a subtle act of sabotage fueled by jealousy or fear. Marcus, undoubtedly, fueled this dynamic. A compliment to one in front of the other, a manufactured slight, a whisper campaign, anything to keep them divided, off balance, and utterly dependent on him. He controlled the finances, collecting any earnings, managing the substantial government benefits the ever-growing number of children brought in. Financial control was absolute. Emotional manipulation was constant. Loyalty wasn't earned, it was enforced through a carefully cultivated atmosphere of fear and dependency. Both Serafina and Chloe, drawn in while young and vulnerable, were ensnared in this tangled web, their lives dictated by Marcus's whims and his insatiable need for control. But even this warped domestic kingdom, bursting at the seams, wasn't enough. The walls felt like they were closing in, and Marcus's ambition, his greed, started looking outwards, demanding more space, more money, and perhaps most importantly, more attention. But even this expanding kingdom wasn't enough to satisfy Marcus's insatiable appetite. The cramped house, the barely managed chaos, it fueled a new ambition, one that would push him to seek resources and attention far beyond the walls of Willow Lane. Because let's be honest, for Marcus Thorne, the ever-increasing number of children weren't simply cherished offspring, they were assets. Each small human represented another potential revenue stream, another boost to the benefits checks that formed the backbone of his existence. He viewed the welfare system not as a safety net, but as a resource to be expertly mined, a game of entitlement he was determined to master through sheer reproductive force. Naturally, the small house on Willow Lane became inadequate for his burgeoning empire. It strained at the seams, packed tight with people and resentment. So began Marcus's relentless campaign against the Oakhaven Council. He didn't request assistance, he demanded a larger property, believing it his right, his due. You can almost picture him, barging into council meetings, radiating righteous indignation, blaming the bureaucrats for the consequences of his own choices. "Look at this family," he might have bellowed, gesturing vaguely towards a poorly photocopied picture. "It's your job to provide. We need more space. Now." His sense of entitlement was a force of nature, deaf to reason or responsibility. When the council, constrained by budgets and perhaps common sense, failed to produce a mythical mansion on demand, Marcus took his grievances public. He actively courted media attention, seeing it as another tool for manipulation. Perhaps he landed an interview in the Oakhaven Chronicle, spinning a sob story about his victimized family struggling against heartless bureaucracy. Maybe he even scored a spot on a garish daytime talk show, think bright lights, a baying audience, and a host specializing in manufactured outrage. Imagine Marcus, defiant under the glare, maybe even bringing Serafina and Chloe along as reluctant props. He'd rail against his critics, dismiss concerns about his lifestyle with a theatrical wave of his hand, portraying himself as a loving, if unconventional, father pushed to the brink. All performance, of course. Narcissism seeking its reflection in the public eye. Behind closed doors, however, the script remained chillingly consistent: the tight financial control, the simmering fear, the children viewed through the lens of their monetary value. His public declarations of love were a sham, a flimsy defense against the growing perception that he was less a struggling father and more a master manipulator exploiting both the system and the vulnerable women he collected. His bids for sympathy often curdled into notoriety. In Oakhaven, he became a subject of scornful whispers, perhaps earning a less than flattering nickname like King Thorne of Willow Lane or Oakhaven's great exploiter. He got the attention he craved, all right, but it wasn't admiration. It was infamy. The failure of his public campaign to secure the larger house only seemed to intensify the pressure within the already volatile household. The walls felt tighter, the air thicker. And inside that pressure cooker, the carefully balanced dynamics Marcus had orchestrated were beginning to buckle, threatening to blow the whole facade apart. The failure of his public campaign to secure the bigger house only seemed to intensify the pressure within the already volatile household. The walls felt tighter, the air thicker. And inside that pressure cooker, the carefully balanced dynamics Marcus had orchestrated were beginning to buckle, threatening to blow the whole facade apart. For Chloe, trapped in the claustrophobic web of Marcus Thorne's making, life had shrunk to a series of carefully navigated moments, each one fraught with the potential for explosion. The initial promise of stability, perhaps even affection, had long since curdled into a daily existence governed by his moods, his demands, and the watchful, weary eyes of Serafina. The breaking point wasn't one single event, more likely a culmination, another stream of verbal abuse, a possessive rage over talking to the mailman, the dawning realization that this was her future if she didn't act. Just unbearable. Escape. The thought, once a fleeting fantasy, became an urgent obsession. But escaping Marcus wasn't simple. He had eyes everywhere, or so it felt. Planning involved hushed whispers, maybe a secret call from a payphone, heart pounding with every coin dropped. Did she confide in Serafina? It's hard to imagine the complexity of that relationship, two women bound by the same controller, yet potentially rivals. Maybe Chloe risked it, only to see fear flicker in Serafina's eyes, a silent warning not to rock the boat. Or perhaps Serafina, worn down herself, offered a cryptic piece of advice, a subtle nod that acknowledged the need to flee but offered no direct help. The secrecy itself must have been agonizing, the fear of discovery a constant companion. The escape itself had to be disguised as routine. A casual, just taking my little ones to the Oakhaven Park for a bit, her voice hopefully betraying none of the terror churning inside. A few essential items stuffed into a diaper bag, hidden beneath blankets. Walking away from the house on Willow Lane, trying not to look back, trying not to run. Every step heavy with the fear of his sudden appearance, his roar of fury. Reaching her sister's doorstep felt like breaching enemy lines, the wave of relief quickly followed by the chilling certainty that this was far from over. He wouldn't just let her go. Not Marcus. And she was right. When Marcus realized Chloe and his children, because in his mind they were his property, had vanished, the explosion was immediate and terrifying. It wasn't a quiet devastation of loss, it was the incandescent fury of narcissistic rage. He had been defied. His absolute control had been challenged. His assets removed. Reports from inside the house later would likely speak of bellowed threats, objects hurled against walls, Serafina and her children cowering, invisible. His ego, massively inflated and incredibly fragile, had suffered a direct hit. The immediate fallout was predictable, a vicious custody battle. But Marcus wasn't fighting out of love or concern for the children's welfare. No. He was fighting to reclaim what was his, to punish Chloe for her insolence, to reassert his dominance, and, undeniably, to secure the financial benefits the children represented. His thwarted desire for public validation now combined with this personal betrayal, this loss of control. His anger didn't dissipate, it simmered, festered, twisting into something far more sinister. He needed those children back, needed Chloe punished. And a truly monstrous idea began to take shape in the darkness of his mind. His fury didn't cool, it festered. Thwarted in his public demands and now defied in his own home, Marcus Thorne began to contemplate darker, more desperate measures. The ongoing custody battle was a constant thorn in his side, a public challenge to his authority. If he couldn't control Chloe through presence, perhaps he could control her through fear, through ruin. An insidious idea, born of pure vindictiveness and wounded pride, began to take root in the fertile ground of his narcissism, a way to get the children back, discredit Chloe entirely, and maybe even emerge as a tragic hero. A carefully orchestrated accident. But such plans require assistants, accomplices, however unwitting or coerced. Marcus wasn't one to get his own hands unnecessarily dirty. He needed someone pliable, somewhat easily influenced. Enter Lenny. Perhaps an old acquaintance from the pub, down on his luck, maybe slightly in awe of Marcus's bravado or simply too weak-willed to say no. Lenny was impressionable, eager for acceptance, maybe even harboring some misplaced loyalty towards Marcus. He was the perfect pawn for the conspiracy Marcus was hatching. And then there was Serafina. Drawing her into the arson plot was crucial. How did he do it? Through threats? Promises? Or by playing on her own fears and resentments towards Chloe, the younger rival? She's trying to destroy everything, Sarah, Marcus might have whispered, his voice laced with feigned vulnerability and menace. This custody battle, she'll poison them against me. We need them back here. Think, just a small fire downstairs. Nothing major. Enough to scare her, make her look negligent. I'll be right there, I'll get the kids out. Everyone will see I'm the responsible one. We'll win. We'll finally get that bigger place the council owes us. Serafina's agreement remains a chilling enigma. Was she simply terrified of Marcus, broken down by years of his coercive control? Did she convince herself it was just a scare tactic, that no real harm would come? Or had his manipulation twisted her perspective so much that she genuinely believed Chloe deserved this framing? Maybe it was a desperate gamble, believing this horrific act was the only path to securing her own precarious position within Marcus's toxic orbit. Her complicity, born of whatever tangled mix of fear, desperation, and twisted loyalty, sealed the bargain. So, the three of them plotted, likely in hushed tones over cheap lager in the cramped living room after the children were asleep. The plan seemed appallingly simple in its conception, time it for the night before the court hearing for maximum impact. A splash of petrol through the letterbox, just enough to start a blaze downstairs. Marcus would then stage a dramatic rescue, emerging as the heroic father saving his children from the chaos implicitly caused by the unfit Chloe. Lenny's role might have been lookout, or perhaps assisting with the accelerant. Serafina's role was likely passive compliance and playing the distraught partner afterwards. It was a cold, calculated strategy focused entirely on revenge, regaining control, and manipulating sympathy, with a breathtaking disregard for the 6 young lives sleeping upstairs. As the chosen deed approached, the tension on Willow Lane must have been unbearable, a silent, suffocating dread hanging in the air. The devil's bargain was sealed. The petrol was acquired. The final act was about to begin. The night arrived, starless and heavy with unspoken dread. The petrol was ready. The stage was set for an act of calculated revenge disguised as heroism. An act whose consequences would be far more devastating than even Marcus, and his arrogance, could have possibly conceived. In the suffocating quiet just before dawn, the plan was set in motion. A splash, a flick of a lighter through the letterbox. But the small fire Marcus envisioned, the controllable blaze that would merely frame Chloe and allow his heroic entrance, didn't materialize. Instead, the cheap accelerant ignited with explosive force. Flames didn't just catch, they roared, instantly consuming the cramped hallway, feasting on the dry tinder of the old house. Thick, black, toxic smoke billowed upwards with terrifying speed, choking the stairwell, transforming the upper floor into an inescapable inferno within moments. The planned rescue? A sick fantasy evaporated in the face of overwhelming heat and blinding, poisonous fumes. Outside, chaos erupted, neighbors woken by the roar and the shattering glass, frantic calls, the wail of approaching sirens cutting through the night. Firefighters arrived to a scene of utter horror, the house engulfed, flames leaping furiously from the windows. When the blaze was finally subdued, and the smoke began to clear, the true, sickening cost of Marcus Thorne's calculated conspiracy was revealed. 6 children. 6 small lives snuffed out in their beds, stolen by the smoke and heat. There was Leo, Seraphina's watchful older boy, always looking out for the little ones. 10-year-old Lily, quick-witted and full of questions. Young Tom, with his infectious grin, and his quieter brother, Ben. 6-year-old Sam, a whirlwind of energy, and little Jake, just 5, always ready for a cuddle. All gone. Sacrificed on the altar of Marcus's ego, victims of a plot hatched in the very house that should have been their sanctuary. Oakhaven was stunned, then heartbroken. A wave of sympathy washed over the town. Flowers transformed the pavement outside the blackened shell of the Willow Lane house into a makeshift shrine. Donations poured in for the supposedly grief-stricken parents. But amidst the genuine outpouring of community sorrow, Marcus Thorne struck a jarring note. He seemed almost energized by the attention. He gave tearful performances for the gathered media.